You're helping a person who is stuck in a habituated pattern. He is addicted to something and you want to come alongside him, but you're not sure if his head's in the game. And so how do you assess a person that you're helping who's stuck? Are they working with you or working against you? We're going to talk about it in this episode. Hello everyone, Rick Thomas here with Daniel Berger. We're doing Life Over Coffee. We're talking about recurring sin patterns in a person's life. By the way, we all have recurring sin patterns in our lives. It's different for each person. In the last episode, we were talking about impatience, anger, and pornography. Consequentially, those things are different, but where they cross over, where they meet as far as similarity is concerned, is that they are recurring patterns. And so as you're helping someone who is stuck, as Paul talked about in 6:1 of Galatians, that they're called. It truly has captured them, and he says that we want to come alongside to cartitizo, or to restore them in a spirit of gentleness. And so what does that look like for you, Daniel? What are some of the things you look for? What's some things that you have in your mind as you're helping that person in a recurring pattern?
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if it's, again, we'll use secular terms like addiction, abuse, whatever way we want to frame this. If a person doesn't have a desire, then desire for help, it doesn't matter what we do. If a guy comes in because his parents are making him come in, or his spouse is saying, here's the ultimatum, I'm leaving you, or you give up your alcohol type thing.
So desire, and then right on the heels of that would be teachability.
Yeah. I think the motive of the heart. So when we talk about desires, what exactly is the desire? Just because they're coming doesn't mean they actually have desire to change. And that I think if you do any amount of counseling, you quickly realize that that's the case. There's a motive behind. And I will also say even secularists, you'll see interviews with guys that were just deeply into what would be called addictions, drugs, alcohol, and they find a way out, right? We'll put that in quotes. Well, what they did was they found a desire that was more important, more valuable than whatever, either escaping the reality, which is a form of dissociation, by the way. We talked about that a couple videos ago, or the pursuit of pleasure. So they found this desire to be less than this desire, because that's how we operate. Where again, Matthew 5, where the treasures of the heart are, where the desire is, there's the treasure. And so that's really who we are. We're pursuing our desires constantly. Sinners have no desire to please God, so they rightfully and understandably just pursue. That's what we do. We're sinners. Yeah. But when God redeems us, when we're in a covenant relationship with Him, He becomes, in the process, richer than gold. We dig for Him like gold and silver. He becomes the sweeter than honey, if you would. And there's that comparison. It's more than, right? It's sweeter than honey. It's as if gold and silver, but more so. So that's what I'm looking for when someone comes in, is what is driving them. Because if they have a desire just to keep their children, they may give up drugs and alcohol. Of course, that's not what they really need. But again, even in that case, the desire is actually allowing them to overcome this desire.
Okay, so some of the things that you're addressing, and these would be indicators that you're looking for in an individual that you're helping, and this will help you to assess them. Of course, we do this subjectively because we're not omniscient and we can't truly know the motives of the heart. But with that said, you still want to go there, and so you're looking for desire. Do they have a desire to change? You're looking at teachability. That desire, they'll be receptive to God's word. You're talking about motivation of the heart, which is similar to desire. You're also talking about worship, and so we are wired to worship. Everybody worships. It's a question you never ask anyone. Do you worship? That's a necessary question. The question that you're asking is, what do you worship, or who do you worship? And so the person who is changing they could be just swapping idols. And so the idol that I was worshiping, I got found out. I got busted. And so now this idol is off the table. And so I'm going to worship this idol here. And so I'm just going to reposition myself on the field, but I'm still not worshiping God. There's one more that you want to see. Are they truly broken before the Lord? It reminds me of what Nathan said to David in 1 Samuel, I think chapter 12, as he told the sheep story. And as he laid that out, he was trying to draw David in to help him realize and to confess that he committed adultery with Bathsheba and had Uriah put to death. After Nathan finished that story, the first words out of David's mouth were, "I sinned against the Lord." And that is just unbelievable. I mean, it just told you, it really told you what God's statement was about David earlier. He's a man after God's own heart. And so this is a person who fell deep into sin, but he had a heart for God. And it's important that those two things do coexist. But he said, "I've sinned against God." And so that if a counselee comes in and says that I've sinned against God, and then as you go and read his confession in Psalm 51, where he says, "Against you only have I sinned and done this evil in your sight." In the most technical sense, that's not an accurate statement, because he sinned against Bathsheba, he sinned against the nation of Israel, he sinned against Uriah, he sinned against so many people. But his heart was so in tune to being broken before God that all he could see was, "I have sinned against God" in 1 Samuel 12, and then in Psalm 51, "Against you and you only have I sinned and done this evil in your sight." That's the attitude and the spirit that you're working with. And I think if that individual came into you and talked like that, I mean, you would sense the genuineness of his brokenness and his desire that he doesn't want to reposition himself on the field by swapping idols, that he's taken all of that off the table. And it's like, I need to get right with God. And that is the sense that you're looking for.
Yeah, and if there is no desire to please God, then we're talking about evangelism, right? In a counseling situation, right. It's not discipleship now; it's evangelism. So we've got that's basically step one, right? To find out where their heart is before God. And so with a Christian who genuinely has a desire, I mean, that's defining a Christian in many ways, is someone who wants and desires God, delights in him. The desires are going to be changing. So he understands God's holiness. I got to give this up because God's holiness. And unfortunately, that's many times, especially in a legalistic setting, that's what the emphasis is, right? God is holy, therefore that's why you give this up. And I'm not denouncing that. That's definitely true. But it's also God's loving kindness and his mercy, because he knows this is actually incredibly destructive for us. And both are healthy and necessary to look at. The reason God is calling us to delight in him is because this is destroying us. Pursuing our own desires, it literally says in James 1, it's the most destructive force there is. And that's unfortunately where we're all bent towards. That's the natural man. And I love what you said about David's heart. He was a man after God's own heart. Well, you look at David, I mean, he was a liar, he was a murderer, he was an adulterer, he was a horrible father, and you look at that and you're like, okay. But the difference was, as you said, even when he messed up, it was immediately I desire to be restored to this. In Psalm 40, he talks about, I have a new song in my mouth, even praise unto my God. That's that worship. I was worshiping self. Now I want to worship the Lord. And that's the heart that God goes, this pleases me. And so, if listeners are struggling, I hope that they will realize that delighting in the Lord, truly desiring him above that pit, that, when people sin, when we have an anger issue, when someone cuts us off, and there's a moral, I call it moral dirtiness. There's you feel horrible. It's not pleasing to the Spirit, and you know it.
When they cut you off, or when you
well, that too. But when
your reaction to someone.
when we're angry and we sin, And all of us do this. It's not just some people. And it may not be an outburst. It may be a heart that's like, who are you to, and no words are said. I know very quiet people that struggle with anger. But again, going back to that issue, it's our moral, our consciousness we were talking about earlier. It tells us this is not right. This is displeasing to God. So it's not just confession either, because people can confess. And one of the, I guess, best definitions of confession I've heard is saying what God says. It's agreeing with what God says, that this is in fact sin. It's destructive. I don't want it. Anybody can do that. Even secularists do that. They recognize that because of the moral law, as Romans 2 says, written in our heart. But then there's a change of heart, which we call theologically repentance, right? It's saying, not only am I saying this is what God says, but now I'm changing my delight. I want to desire that. And if that's not taking place, if there is no desire for God, it's just a guilt and a shame and, why am I doing this? Then the heart is not pursuing God. And really a person needs to look at it. There needs to be a battle, that war against the flesh and the spirit.
Yeah, so if you're keeping track, and it's important to have a list, for lack of a better word, of indicators, that just things that you're looking for, not a legalistic list like you have to hit all these marks. I'm not saying that. But there need to be categories that you're looking for in the person. This is called discernment. It's using biblical wisdom as you're helping someone. And so desires and motive and teachability and worship and delighting in the Lord. You also mentioned confession as well, and agreeing with what God's assessment on what you did. I like the term moral dirtiness. That is a subjective sense that you should get from the person who's communicating to you. If they're truly feeling that, experiencing that I have sinned against God, and they feel that depravity, that should come out. I mean, you should feel that. So these are some of the indicators that you're looking at when you're helping someone who's stuck in a recurring pattern. One of the things that we teach our students in our mastermind program, talking about confession, is that when you're talking to a person who has done, like what David, for example, is that sometimes that their confession will only rise up to what the public awareness is. They only confess to what people know. And that could be the extent of all that they have done. And I'm saying that's possible. But in many cases, they've done more than what we know. Mm-hmm. And so one of the indicators that you're looking for is, does their confession outdistance what you know? Do they tell more? And so if a person is confessing, and it's something, and again, I'm not saying that every person has done more than what you know. Maybe that is the extent of it. But you do want to give consideration that if this person is truly broken, that they want this thing to be totally clean, and they want truly restoration to God and to others, then they're going to come clean. And I've had that conversation many times, especially in adultery situations and pornography situations. But I remember in one instance, and we'll wrap up with this, but I had an individual who committed adultery, and we were doing the counseling session, and I told him at some point in the counseling that, it's like you're completely exposed here, and so I'm not suggesting anything. I'm not even...
Nowhere to go.
Yeah, there's nowhere to go, and I'm not judging you. But just let me say this, that if there's more out there that you haven't said, this would be the time to just lay it all out, because what you don't want to do is get 6 months down the road and say, well, yeah, I committed adultery, and by the way, and then all the progress that we made, assuming there will be progress in these 6 months, it's just going to collapse on you. And so, this is the time to just tell it all. He took that to heart, and he came back the next counseling session, and he said, well, it actually wasn't one person that I committed adultery with. It was multiple people. Mm. And it was fabulous in the sense of confession. Right. And of course, their marriage stayed together. They worked through all of it, and they're doing exceedingly well today. But he decided that I'm just not going to play any more games. I'm just going to be totally free from this. I'm going to confess. So we're talking about how to help a person who is in a habituation, a long-term sin pattern, some of the indicators that you're looking for. We talked about timing, the past couple of episodes with this one and the one before this would be helpful. If you have questions that you want to ask us, please ask, and we'd love to consider it. Thank you so much for watching the video.